It's been coming down every other day, but they tell me we are in drought season. That's not my story, not my reality. No matter what you force my eyes to
Conflict
see.
and war and fighting and division, polarization, geopolitics, and the grand chessboard that is the Earth realm as we know it, as we experience on the daily. We think that there are new issues and new conflicts and new battles that are emerging and new enemies that are always just ready to pounce and always just ready to launch a nuclear weapon or some other fantastical and non-existent thing at us from over there. The enemy is always just over there, even though the industry that supplies them is over here. Always has been, and the banking interests that benefit from both sides of any and all conflicts and wars are over here and over there, and have their fingers in every pie, in every situation that benefits them financially or politically or somewhere in the whole power structure of things. And these people that, if you can call them people, that populate the parasite class or the predator class, which is kind of the, two sides of the same coin, that seem to feed off human creativity, human energy, and human emotion, are experts, and ancient experts at that, at manipulating the system, pulling the strings to their advantage, and taking advantage of our ignorance and lack of critical thinking capacity or discernment or education in these matters, simply because we're taught lies through the school system. We're taught fake histories. We're taught manipulated narratives. We're soaked and saturated in the propaganda at state level, right down to your neighborhood level, every day for your entire life. So how would you know any better unless you actually looked into it, did a bit of independent research, and spent an awful lot of time going in circles, ultimately discovering that it's all bullshit, it's all fiction, it's all made up, and that rarely in most of these events, especially today, does anyone actually get hurt, does anyone die. I'm not saying that they don't die, but I'm saying it's nowhere near what the headlines tell you it is. Nor is it based on any reasonings and or excuses or justifications that are promoted and promulgated in our Western media, and especially Western media, which is excellent at pushing false narratives and social engineering and state propaganda. Very little, if any, truth ever exists in these places, especially in the quote-unquote mainstream. You'll never find what is true there, but you'll certainly react to it. You'll feel its impulses, you'll feel its machinations, you'll feel its reverberations, because the general population relies on these sources of information and these so-called news agencies, and even the intelligence gathering community and the intelligence agencies, very few of which ultimately benefit the society that they're based in. They're all part of the military industrial complex, whether it's local or transnational. It's all part of the same network and all based on the same fundamental miscues, misdirections, misguided notions of safety and security. And while they do certainly have their place in averting unnecessary human loss, it's all just part of a game that can never and will never end, because they have massive budgets. They need to justify these budgets. Worse than that, though, is that there's an element to this realm, to this reality, this construct, that keeps these games going and keeps them well funded and keeps pounding ideas and paradigms and propaganda into the minds and hearts and spirits of human beings, generation after generation after generation. And there's only so long you can resist these kind of ideas, if at all, because if you're born into it and pushed into the extremism through the indoctrination and social engineering, and a lot of these places even today have this MK Ultra sort of aspect to them, where they're breaking people down and remaking them in a certain kind of image, certain paradigm, co-opting a lot of their independence and agency creating these schisms in their personality constructs so that you can have these agents that are sleepers, as you'd probably know them in the mainstream. They don't even know what they're capable of. They don't even know what they've been trained to do or what they will do if and when they are activated to do so, which will usually only be harm, injury, and death to other human beings, that if they were cognizant and aware of their actions, they would, of course, never do, because humans by default don't do that. And we're the only species that really does engage in self-annihilation in such a manner. And because every decade, every generation has no concept of history and what came before them, these ideas can be recycled and reused and reseeded and deeply seated into the now generation, into the children that are coming up, into fresh minds and hearts that can be traumatized anew with the same stories, with the same lies, most of which will never question it, most of which will adopt these ideas and carry them through life as true and real and legitimate storylines and narratives and perceptions about who's the enemy and who to be worried about and who is good, who is bad. You know, that religion is ridiculous and evil and nasty. They're blah, blah, blah. Our religion's the real one. That language is based on blah, blah, blah. That culture is evil and they do these sort of things. Ours is the good one. So we need to be prepared at any time to attack them and to repel their evils, etc. It's all these narratives that are twisted around and distorted, like they're doing today in places like Iran, Ukraine, Georgia, and everywhere else in different levels, in different manners. In Europe, you have a systematic destruction of cultures and languages and this homogenization into the union, which is strictly a parasitic entity, stripping away freedoms, slowly eroding things over years and decades, as these things tend to play out over the long term. Things that you don't realize, it's that pot boiling sort of thing. You don't realize it until it's well past the time you can do anything about it, short of some sort of extreme revolution or whatever it is. And all that costs is massive human lives, which, as we've already spoken about, these self-professed elite classes are well prepared for and plan for and know one way or another that they will benefit from, because it won't hurt them any, won't harm their assets. If anything, it'll free up more resources, more land, more hearts and minds that'll be traumatized, confused, and lost, ready for fresh propaganda and fresh narratives to be inserted, installed, injected into their consciousness. Because we're made to forget, because the system is so expertly designed to revise and erase and redact history, we don't really know where we stand. So we're always trying to play catch up, and then things happen in real time and quite rapidly, especially in the modern era with technology and the improvements that the military industrial complex has made in killing people and doing it from a distance without any sort of loss to their particular industry or their manpower. They can just put the machines and the robots and the AI to work now. And most of that, of course, is operating in the psychological level. It's all mostly the intangible sort of warfare that's psyop based, psychologically, emotionally, psychically, spiritually. They don't have to spend a single dime on missiles and planes and drones and what have you. They can just make it up, because we're reliant on screens, and for the most part, we're going to believe what we see on these 2D screens at first, because those images will imprint, will react, will have an emotional response, and the vast majority of us will know that that's not true. We'll look beyond the headlines, not just the subtitles, but reading between the lines of the text, reading between the lines of what someone is saying on the screen or writing in their articles. So that's a matter of discernment and being able to scrutinize and critique the information that's coming at you. Something that we should more likely aspire to improve our abilities at if we want to be less attached and less affected by these manufactured crises and the false narratives that are coming at us every day of the week. But what you can be sure of is that if it's always the same enemies, if it's always the same big baddies that are repeatedly put in the headlines and attached to ideas like nuclear weapons or their power programs or their energy, this, that, and the other thing that is an alleged threat, and we're going on 20, 30, 40 years of regurgitating the same nonsense that's never been proven to be true, that's never been proven to be a legitimate threat, and never, in fact, factually, possibly in this reality, will be an actual threat. They're just using the words. And because of our conditioning through the media, through films, through television shows, and the inputs that we've put ourselves through over decades and generations, whether it's viruses in the germ theory, that fraud, that hoax, whether it's the nuclear threat, that fraud, that hoax, these are major. These are emotional anchors that we've been consciously or unconsciously traumatized by and attached all sort of emotionality and existential sort of fears and ideas to that we're not usually aware of because it's gone deep down into our subconscious. So we don't even know it, to what extreme we're programmed unless we're paying attention. So when the headline does come across the feed, or some pundit, some paid actor comes on some sort of a news program to talk about what their opinion about what's real and what's a threat and who's doing what to whom and why we need to use this nation as a proxy to attack them before they become a threat. All these nonsense narratives using someone else's army and resources to do your bidding, just like the West and Western empires doing in places I've already listed: Iran, Ukraine, Georgia, all these places that they keep encroaching on the likes of China and Russia and all these other Eastern superpowers and the BRICS nations, all of that stuff, where the power is inevitably going to be shifting back to over the next generation or two, probably, because that's where it was before it moved to the West. And it's one of these it's one of these oscillations of civilizational power that seems pretty evident on the face of it based on the players in the world and the superpowers as we see them today. Some of these societies are quite ancient, like Russia and China are far older than what's out west. On these child nations such as the UK and Canada and all the Commonwealth and former colonies of the British Empire, they're children compared to some of these older cultures, right? And they're belligerent children at that, right? Because they got their fingers into it. They got the London power center set up where, all funds are flowing into these major banking centers, and all the power kind of stretches out of their tentacles into the world operations, into the military industrial complexes of Western Empire. So they utilize these forces such as NATO and the UN and other things, the WEF, the WHO, to just have a stranglehold on the Western mindset, but also to create these proxy conflicts and never really get their fingers dirty and use justifiable actions and language. And oops, that pipeline blew up. I guess we're going to have to go the other way and get energy that way because, Russia bad, America good, on and on and on and on, right? So these narratives just keep being multiplied and proliferated based on completely false premises and false histories and this dualistic sort of polarity that's just completely made up. The same idea goes, telling these big enough lies long enough, it becomes your truth simply because it's just always there. You're swimming in the soup of it 24/7. Even if you're not directly paying attention, you this consensus energy that passes through the collective, whether it's communal, regional, in your state. And then there's the people that control the information and the news sources within your country that make sure a certain narrative gets disseminated within your nation's borders, within your province, within your city. They can be extremely efficient with the targeting of these things now, right? So all the more reason to be just extremely discerning and picky about where you get your informational nutrition from, as it were, to get really serious about your inputs and what you're allowing to come into your consciousness, into your mind, into your energy, and to really come to terms to understanding that, based on what I've outlined already, none of these things are based on truth. Sure, there is some contention, there is a combativeness and contentiousness between these nations, but that is again being fomented by these power structures behind the scenes to ensure that certain initiatives, be it East or Western, whoever's agenda it might be, there are people that, ensure that there's no stability, no lasting peace, no lasting agreement between these powers, because it's, in their minds, perhaps more profitable to manipulate things behind the scenes to be more controllable and more ripe for the picking, as it were, because they're extractive. That's the whole idea with the predator and parasitic type of mindset. It's extractive to pull out the resources, whether it's human intellect, human ingenuity, human psychic energy, through our emotional traumatization, whatever it might be, through, of course, the Earth's resources, to keep reaffirming these fake lines on maps with which they decide who gets what territory, who is able to extract what from where, for what purpose. And that links to every other industry that you can imagine now. You look at electric cars and alternative bullshit energy sources that are completely wasteful and ridiculous and inefficient. Solar should be 50 years further along than it is now. Wind power is an absolute joke. Any of these things fall apart under the weight of their own details if you bother to look into it, and just how wasteful and inefficient and ridiculous they are. Certainly we could be better stewards of the Earth's resources. Certainly we could be pursuing better tech that's less extractive, but we don't. The lie of the green agenda is that it's supposed to be some sort of sustainability thing, which is complete opposite of what it actually is. That's just a matter of course for this inverted clown world that we live in. And how they sell that idea, of course, is through the indoctrination and social engineering and the messaging that's consistently pushed into your mind about green, sustainable agenda, climate, all these words that mean nothing, such as, climate change, and the complete farce, fraud, hoax that whole agenda is. Again, extracting resources and money and funding and taxes and everything that they keep just sucking out of human ingenuity, out of the civilization, out of the collective's energy resources at all times.
Running fast through the fire and stone. Our hearts are racing whenever.
Because we're essentially limitless, right? We have endless and unlimited energy reserves, which we're probably generally unaware of. We're not certainly living by these things because we're stressing, we're aging, we're suffering disease and illness at every turn, we're eating poorly, we're sleeping poorly, we're interacting and communicating and relating poorly. Everything is just kind of below any sort of a standard and quality, right? There's a quality that's lacking throughout the whole human factor in general, right? There's pockets and there's people and there's small communities, and there's probably some people that you might know that regardless of everything that's going on, they're thriving, they're living quite well, and they seem to have their shit together. They seem to be at ease with everything, regardless of what seems to be happening out in the world. But I think that's, as with most of these things, it's the exception, not the rule. And it would be nice, and they keep selling us on this utopian idea that if only we could join hands and get together, we would have world peace, and all these lies of pop music and that kind of ridiculous notion, which will never happen, has never happened. So get real, get honest with yourself, and realize that that's not the point of this place, right? There is no such thing as world peace. There are too many factors, too many moving parts, too many manipulators, too many parasites and predators in the mix to have any sort of worldwide, reality-wide sort of peace thing. Even though by default, we kind of come into the game like that. But we get twisted around, we get distorted, we get traumatized, we get beaten up, chewed up, spit out. Not all of us, but I think it's safe to say the vast majority of us go through all sorts of things that were on some level unplanned, unexpected, things we wished we didn't have to go through, the pains and suffering and the struggles that we succumbed to, and then if we're still around, we overcame it, we grew through it to some degree, or we became jaded, cynical, what have you. It altered our perspective, altered our trajectory, changed our whole outlook on life and our idea of our purpose for being. But eventually, we come to the realization that we were sold some sort of a bill of goods. We were sold these utopian sort of ideals, these lies, these throwbacks to whether it's a religious outlook or a new agey thing. It's some sort of a spiritual distortion, or the idea of ascension and 5D and all these crazy terms that come out and just keep people chasing and chasing and chasing. If only we could figure out how to, elevate and ascend so that we can be free of this earthly sort of battle. Getting back to the idea of the human energy, the creative spark that is us, the animating force that is unlimited, that that initiated our existence in the first place is inexhaustible. And when it's misdirected, misguided, misused, because we've projected our power and authority onto somebody else, they can soak it up, sap it up, suck it away for an entire lifetime, which is not very long, as we well know. It goes quickly. So the sooner that we can realize we've been yanked around by some leash, an invisible leash, an invisible chokehold, an invisible vampiric sort of idea, an invisible energy waste, whatever you want to call it. You think of ideas like that were presented in films like The Matrix, and the idea of the human battery. I mean, these are parallels, metaphors, analogies for the bigger picture, the bigger story. That's a pretty, extreme and literal example, perhaps, of how humans could be utilized and sapped of their life force and their energy to feed the machine, as it were. And I think it behooves us to become conscious of ways that we're feeding the machine, that we're subjecting ourselves to things that aren't necessary to play a part of, that we simply need to raise our awareness and become aware of these things, because once you can name it, once you see it, you dispel its power over you. Become aware that these stories, these elements, these artifacts, narratives, social engineering, mind control, propaganda, it's all part of the same umbrella, and it all comes from the same source. That's trying to suck your life energy and your ability to concentrate and create and be in your flow state more often than not. It's all there. You're one thought away from stepping back into that, and not necessarily reversing the flow, but stopping the waste of that flow and just giving it away to those parasitic forces that are more than happy to take it all and more. But because we're infinite and inexhaustible energy sources, I think that's why these games are played, to try and trap us, to trick us into feeding these systems and machinations and the artificial intelligence, as it were, which is, it's a very apt phrase for the modern era, because essentially the whole network, the whole operation, everything that's affecting civilization, the human collective, is an artificial intelligence. It's not a human intelligence. It's something that's subdued its human intelligence, subverted it, or set it aside for some different ideals, and that those that are involved consciously or unconsciously probably don't realize what, it's so compartmentalized, these things. They don't realize that they're feeding the monsters, and that they're feeding the very system that they purport to be fighting against. They don't realize that they are in fact the enemy to some degree. So one can hope that they'll wake up and come to some realization somewhere along the way, but in the meantime, it's upon us, the individual, this unique individuation that you are, to reconnect with the soul, with the story from within, that immortal within, that energy spark that is you, that's inexhaustible, that is forever, that came here to play and experiment and do some sort of existential dance for a time, and to reframe things and to reclaim that agency and authority from those machinations, from that artificial intelligence that wants to just eat it all up. Don't just give it away. Ultimately, that conflict, that polarity, is something that's created from within, and if they can implant that idea, utilize it without your conscious knowing, without your awareness, without even, I can't say without your consent, because clearly on some level you'd have to consent, right? Because we are, sovereign creator beings, so there's no way that something can simply sap your energy and tap into your infinite potential, your immortal spark, whatever you want to call it, without permission on some level. So take it back, or take back that permission. Just say no, contract over, offer nullified, no thank you. And do it as often as you need to, because you've been programmed for a lifetime. Whether you're 5 years old or 50 years old, it's going to vary only to a degree. But as I was saying, you're one thought away in any moment from reclaiming that, from shifting that flow, from reorienting your compass, as it were. Discernment, critical thinking, spiritual centered, living from the inside out. All of these things, variations on this theme. And that's what the autonomy of the immortal within is all about. Reclaiming that space, reclaiming that conscious awareness, dispelling all those ideas, even the thoughts that are coming up that are constantly causing you anxiety, worry, fear, what have you. Oh, that's that thought again. I see you. Gone. Oh, that's that thought again. Oh, that's that worry about that. That's that thought again. Oh, there's my old buddy that I've been thinking for the last 30 years. That worry about, that regret, that anger, that angst, that judgment, that attachment, that resentment. All of these things that you keep, these tiny little threads that are sucking away your energy that you might not even be aware of until you become aware of them. Till you sit in that silence and realize, holy crap, I am giving away a lot of my psychic, spiritual, creative force, and yet I'm still alive, and yet I can still rest and get up in the morning and do it again, because the source of that energy is inexhaustible. So it's a matter of reclaiming and just remembering who and what you are, which is not as simple as it sounds necessarily, right? There's a lot of layers, a lot of conditions in the way that might slow you down, that might create these roadblocks back to self. But it's always there. So dispel that conflict within and change the flow. Name it, reclaim it, take it back. Have a good one.
For shadows you bring of your own, a slap in the face of your mother, your chances of peace are unknown. Learning to step back, release